The galaxy celebrated until they realized they had started a war with humans. The cinders were still drifting when High Arbiter Vane turned away from the viewport. He didn't wait to watch Vesta 4 finish burning. The colony had been small, a few thousand humans clustered on a rock the hegemony needed for orbital relay expansion. The incineration had taken 11 minutes. His tactical staff had logged it as a calibration test of the new atmospheric burn arrays because that was functionally what it was, a test. The humans happened to be there. Vane's fingers tapped against the arm of his command chair, 3 slow beats, then 2 faster ones, a habit his staff had learned to read as boredom. He pulled up the sector report on his data slate and scrolled past the Vesta 4 entry without reading it. Signal the outer colonies, he said. Standard notice. Expansion protocol class 3 relocation. If there are more human settlements in the relay corridor, they have 72 hours to self-evacuate. His communications officer, a young Ethelguard named Seth, turned from his console. High Arbiter, the signal will reach the nearest human administrative center in approximately 40 hours. That leaves them 32 hours to move several thousand individuals. Yes, Vane set the slate down. They should have been monitoring our expansion vectors. That they weren't is a failure of their own planning, not ours. He paused, and something that was not quite a smile crossed his face. Send a supplemental message. Tell them we consider this a demonstration of their place in the current order, and that further resistance will be met in the same spirit. Seth typed. He did not look up. Do you want a reply window? No. 3,400 colonists. That was the count pulled from the Vesta 4 population registry, later, by a human archivist named Darsa who had been off-world when the burn happened, and who spent the next 6 weeks cross-checking names against evacuation manifests that kept coming up empty. 3,400. She printed that number on paper, a single sheet, handwritten, because the official record system had been flagged as potentially compromised, and left it on the desk of the one man she trusted to do something with it. Director Elias Thorne read the number once. He did not react the way Darsa expected. He didn't go still, didn't close his eyes, didn't set his jaw the way people do in vids when they receive terrible news. He just looked at the paper for a moment, then folded it carefully along the existing crease and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket, close to his chest. Thank you, he said. Go home. What are we going to do? She asked. Thorne was already looking at the window. Outside, the relay station's transit lanes were quiet, the standard afternoon lull, cargo ships moving in slow arcs between docking arms. Nothing yet, he said. Go home. Stay close. What happened in the silence after that, that's the part they didn't put in the public record. The official human response came 14 hours after the destruction of Vesta 4. It was exactly what the hegemony expected, a formal diplomatic protest, filed through the standard interspecies grievance channel, citing 3 separate articles of the Galactic Compact. High Arbiter Vane's legal staff reviewed it, noted that the Compact's enforcement mechanism required a vote of the 9-member Advisory Council, of which the hegemony held 4 seats, and filed a counter-notation stating that the relay expansion had proceeded under the Technological Primacy Clause, subsection 7, which granted advanced civilizations operational rights of way in underdeveloped sectors. The counter-notation was 300 pages long. The human diplomatic team received it and went quiet. This was expected too. The hegemony had used the primacy clause 11 times in the past 2 centuries. Each time the species on the receiving end had protested, been buried in procedural paper and eventually resettled. Most of them were still resettling. The clause worked because it was real law. The hegemony had written it into the compact 4,000 years ago, and no one had ever had the leverage to remove it. Vane reviewed a summary of the human response at his morning briefing, listened to his legal attaché confirm the diplomatic channel was now effectively stalled, and moved to the next item on the agenda, fleet reassignment to the Outer Veil campaign. He did not think about Vesta 4 again. Humans were Category 5 species, pre-FTL within living memory, no significant military infrastructure, trading relationships with 3 mid-tier civilizations, nothing that would concern a hegemony High Arbiter. There were 412 species currently within hegemony administrative reach. Humans ranked 209th on the Resource Contribution Index. They were, in any meaningful sense of the word, background noise. What Vane did not know, what no one in the hegemony knew, was that the human diplomatic team's silence was not defeat. It was a door closing. On the inside of that door, something had already started. Director Elias Thorne sat across from Chief Engineer Kalen Vance in a room with no network connections. This was not unusual. Thorne kept 3 such rooms, in 3 separate locations, and rotated between them on a schedule no one else knew. What was unusual was that Vance had brought a box. It was not a large box. It held 11 hardbound logbooks, the kind with cloth covers and acid-free pages, the kind that human engineers had used for maintenance documentation before standardized digital systems made paper unnecessary. They were old. The covers were worn. Vance set the box on the table and did not explain it. "Tell me how long," Thorne said. Vance thought about it. To get something into the baseline protocols, 18 months. To get it stable, test it, and run it deep enough that a diagnostic wouldn't catch it. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. 18 years. Thorne nodded once, and if we start now, we'd finish in 18 years. A long pause, through the wall very faintly, the sound of a docking clamp releasing, a ship departing. The hegemony, Thorne said carefully, runs its entire logistics network on the Deathworld distributed management system. All 1,400 active fleet nodes, every orbital station in their core worlds, every supply routing protocol they've built in the last 6 decades. Yes, sir. And the Deathworld system's maintenance protocols are serviced by contractors. Yes, sir. Human contractors, Thorne said, because we're cheaper. Vance looked at him steadily, because they think we can't understand the code well enough to do anything with it. Another silence. Thorne reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper. He unfolded it, looked at the number written there, then set it flat on the table between them. 3,400, he said, and they sent a counter notation. Vance looked at the paper, then he looked at the box of maintenance logs. The override syntax is in those logs, all of it, written out in full in plain technical notation because no one thought to protect documentation that only a primitive species would use. He paused. Vane's office literally filed them as non-material artifacts in the expansion survey. They're sitting in a hegemony archival server right now. Thorne was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was completely level. Pull your best people, not the ones who want revenge, the patient ones. How many? Enough to do this right, not so many it leaks. He stood, folding the paper again, pocketing it. And Kalen, no one outside this room knows what this is, not what we're building, not what it's for, not the timeline. He looked at the box of logbooks. As far as the hegemony is concerned, we are exactly what they think we are. Vance picked up the top logbook and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was small and precise, maintenance notation, rows of system codes and diagnostic readings, the kind of thing that a hegemony archivist had glanced at and dismissed as primitive record-keeping. "What do I call it?" he said. Thorne was already moving toward the door. "The ledger," he said. The first human maintenance contractors arrived on Hegemony Station Kethnal 7 4 months after the destruction of Vesta 4. There were 9 of them. They wore standard contractor badges, carried standard tools, and had passed standard background checks through the Hegemony's automated employment screening system. The screening system was, like everything in the Hegemony's logistics network, serviced by the Deathworld distributed management protocol. The 9 contractors reported to their assigned sections, ran calibration checks on 3 secondary relay nodes, filed their paperwork on time, and left at the end of their rotation. Their work was reviewed by a Hegemony Systems overseer named Breath, who noted it as satisfactory and logged it as a closed item. Breath did not notice, there was no reason to notice, that the calibration check had left a small subroutine running in the relay node's lowest maintenance layer. Not a virus, not an intrusion, just a small, patient piece of code sitting below the threshold of any standard diagnostic, doing nothing at all. Waiting. 3 weeks later, a second team arrived at a different station, then a third, then a fourth. High Arbiter Vane, reviewing the sector expansion report from his command bridge, saw a line item noting increased human contractor activity across the relay network. He read it, registered it as economically logical, humans were after all cheap labor, and moved to the next line. His fingers tapped the arm of his chair, 3 slow beats, then 2 faster ones. Year 2. The second cohort of human contractors finished their rotation on Station Kethnal 7 and filed out through the same departure bay the first cohort had used. Their work logs were clean, their tool inventories matched. The Hegemony Systems overseer, a different one this time, Breath having been reassigned to the Outer Veil campaign, signed off on the rotation in under 4 minutes and flagged it as routine maintenance, low priority, no follow-up required. In the maintenance layer beneath the station's primary relay trunk, a second small piece of code settled next to the first. It did not announce itself. It consumed no processing resources worth measuring. It simply waited the way a seed waits, not with impatience, not with anything at all. Kalen Vance, back in the windowless room with no network connections, opened logbook number 4 and checked the notation on page 31 against a diagram he had drawn on paper. He made one small correction, refolded the diagram, and wrote the date in the margin. Year 2, month 7, node density incomplete. He had a list on the wall, not digital paper fixed with tape, the kind of thing someone would glance at and see as a shopping list. Each item was a station name translated into a number between 1 and 40, and beside each number was a series of small marks. Some marks were checks, most were not yet. He looked at the list for a long moment, then he added one check. Year 5. A hegemony administrative review of the relay network noted that human contractor utilization had risen by a factor no one had formally tracked, since human labor rates sat well below the threshold that triggered budget review flags. The review mentioned this in a footnote as evidence of efficient resource allocation. The recommendation was to extend the contractor agreement for another standard cycle. The extension was approved in one morning's paperwork. Director Elias Thorne, reading a summary of the extension approval in his office, made a note in the margin of his physical copy and filed it in a cabinet with a lock he had changed himself. The note said, ahead of schedule. Chief Engineer Vance was at that moment on his 14th contractor rotation, this time at a station called Kethnal 19 in the hegemony's second-tier relay corridor. He was doing what he always did, calibrating secondary systems, filing clean reports, and in the lowest maintenance layer that no hegemony diagnostic ever reached, leaving one more patient piece of the ledger behind. The handwritten log he carried, worn cover, pages filled with maintenance notation that any hegemony archivist would have called primitive record keeping, held the override syntax for the station's power regulation core. The syntax was not hidden exactly. It was just written in a form that the hegemony's automated scanning systems did not recognize as functional code, because the hegemony had designed those systems to scan for their own code architecture. Human notation looked to those systems like noise. Vance had understood this 3 weeks into the project. He had not told anyone outside the core team, because the fewer people who understood how simple it was, the safer it stayed. Back on the Apex Sovereign, High Arbiter Vane received a sector briefing that mentioned in its final paragraph that the human diplomatic grievance channel had gone quiet. No new filings, no public statements, no appeals to the advisory council. His communications attaché, a precise young Ethelgard named Save, added a verbal note. Human civil administration appeared to be in a period of quiet internal reorganization. There were some minor trade adjustments, reduced export of raw materials through 2 of the major transit lanes, but nothing that rose to the level of concern. Vane listened, nodded, and moved to the next item. Later, reviewing the briefing notes on his slate, his finger paused over that paragraph for just a moment. Not long. He had governed 212 species at various levels of administrative reach. He knew what a broken species looked like. They went quiet, reorganized their survivors, and eventually petitioned for protected status. The quiet was the expected thing. He moved to the next item. His fingers tapped the arm of his chair, 3 slow beats, 2 faster. The tap was a tell his staff had learned to read as boredom, but it was also, on some level, a form of thinking. A rhythm he kept when things were proceeding according to the pattern he knew. Things were proceeding according to the pattern he knew. He did not think about Vesta 4 again that year. Year 9. A junior hegemony analyst named Kale, newly assigned to the Infrastructure Monitoring Division, eager, thorough, ran a statistical pass on contractor access logs across the relay network. He was looking for billing anomalies. He found something slightly different. The density of human contractor rotations had clustered in his model around certain node types, specifically nodes at the junction of primary and secondary relay trunks. He wrote a short report. He flagged it internal review. It sat in the internal review queue for 6 weeks. Then a senior analyst, overworked and processing a backlog of 300 flagged items, reviewed it, noted that contractor clustering around junction nodes was logistically predictable since junction nodes required more frequent calibration, and closed it as explained. Kale did not push back. He was new. His next assignment was billing audits for the Outer Veil campaign. 3 months later, Vance's teams completed coverage of all junction nodes in the second-tier relay corridor. He added the last check to his paper list, took it down from the wall, and folded it into the back cover of logbook number 7. The ledger's reach now covered, in rough terms, a significant portion of the hegemony's relay infrastructure. Not all of it, not yet, but enough that the thing Vance had designed, the part he had not described to anyone in precise terms, only to Thorne, was beginning to become possible rather than theoretical. He closed logbook 7, he opened logbook 8. The cost of the project was not measured in money. Money had been found quietly through a series of research grants, consulting contracts and trade adjustments that looked, from outside, like a small species trying to stay economically relevant in a galaxy that considered them marginal. The real cost was measured in other things. 3 of Vance's core team over the course of the first decade left the project, not because they disagreed, because the patience required, the absolute refusal to rush to act to respond to anything, was not something every person could sustain across years. One of them, a systems engineer named Petra, sat across from Thorne in the windowless room at the end of year 4 and told him she understood why they were doing it and could not do it anymore. That the weight of knowing and waiting was different from the weight of grief, and she could carry grief but not this. Thorne listened. He did not try to change her mind. The people who left Vesta 4 have a memorial, he said. You can go there. She went. She never spoke about the project. The people who stayed got quieter each year. Vance noticed it in himself, a stillness that had not always been there. He stopped getting angry at the news feeds when a hegemony expansion announcement came across. He stopped eventually reading the feeds at all. There was only the work, the logbooks, the list of checks on the wall growing slowly. Thorne, for his part, kept the folded piece of paper in his inside jacket pocket. Every time he changed jackets, he moved it to the new one. He did not look at it often. It was enough to know it was there. Year 14. The hegemony launched a sector-wide infrastructure upgrade initiative. The upgrade was designed to increase throughput across all relay nodes by integrating a new efficiency layer directly into the Deathworld management protocol. The integration process required that human contractor teams assist with baseline calibration across several hundred nodes, since the human teams had accumulated the most current familiarity with the existing maintenance layers. Vane's infrastructure minister noted this in a briefing as an example of hegemony resource efficiency, leveraging lower-tier species' accumulated labor familiarity to reduce integration costs for a strategic upgrade. Vane approved the expanded contractor engagement without reading past the first paragraph. The expanded engagement gave Vance's teams access to 46 nodes they had not previously been able to reach. By the end of year 15, the ledger had full representation across the hegemony's primary relay network. Not a backdoor exactly, the hegemony had no word for what it was, because the hegemony had not imagined it was possible. It was more like a second architecture, grown in the negative space of the first, patient and silent and comprehensive, waiting for a single synchronized command. Vance stood in the windowless room with a new list on the wall. This one had no unchecked items. He looked at it for a long time. Then he pulled out his communicator, encrypted, air-gapped, the only kind he used anymore, and sent a single message to Thorne. The message said, Year 18 is now Year 15. Thorne read the message in his office. He read it twice. He set the communicator down on the desk and sat without moving for what might have been 3 minutes. Then he stood, walked to the window and looked out at the transit lanes, the same ones he had looked at years ago when Darsa had asked him what they were going to do. The lanes were fuller now. Hegemony cargo ships mostly. The hegemony's trade expansion had accelerated. They moved in slow arcs exactly as they always had, massive, confident, unhurried. The hegemony had been doing this for 14,000 years. It had done it to 411 other species before humanity. It expected to do it to 400 more. Thorne reached into his jacket and took out the folded piece of paper. He unfolded it, as he had done perhaps a dozen times in 15 years, and looked at the number written there. 3,400. He folded it again. He picked up his communicator and sent 3 words back to Vance. Hold, not yet. This was the part that did not make the history records later. Not the 15 years of code migration, not the 3 team members who left, not the analyst who almost found it and was reassigned to billing. What did not make the records was the year after Vance sent his message and Thorne replied, hold. Because the ledger was ready, had been ready by Thorne's own calculation, 3 years ahead of schedule, and Thorne chose to wait. He had a reason. The hegemony in year 16 launched another expansion push. 2 new species flagged for Class 3 relocation. One of them had a population smaller than Vesta 4. The relocation notice gave them 60 hours. They complied. Thorne watched the reports. He did not move. His core team, the ones who had stayed, who had built this thing across 15 years, did not ask him why. They had learned not to ask. But Vance, alone with him in the windowless room, said it once very quietly. What are we waiting for? Thorne was looking at the wall where the finished list used to hang. For them to do it again, he said, so that when we move it is not about Vesta 4, it is about a pattern. He paused. Patterns are harder to argue with than grief. Vance did not say anything for a moment. And if they don't, Thorne turned away from the wall, they will. He was right. In year 17, the hegemony flagged a second human colony, a small mining settlement called Dara Station, 1,100 people, positioned along the outer edge of the new expansion corridor. The relocation notice was standard, Class 3, 48 hours. Dara Station did not comply, not as a protest. They genuinely could not evacuate 1,100 people in 48 hours with the transport capacity available. They sent a message explaining this. The hegemony sent the atmospheric burn arrays. Thorne received the news in the windowless room. He sat with it. His face did not change. Around the table, 3 members of his core team were very still. He reached into his pocket and took out the folded paper. He looked at the number on it. Then he set it flat on the table, pulled out his communicator and typed a new message to Vance. Year 18, final check. We begin synchronization. The synchronization took 11 days. Not because it was difficult. Vance had designed it to be simple once the conditions were right. It was slow because Thorne insisted on running it in stages, one cluster at a time, each cluster verified before the next began, each node confirmed responsive before the sequence advanced. He would not rush this. He had not rushed anything in 17 years. He was not going to rush the last 11 days. Vance ran the checks from the windowless room. The results came back clean one by one. Each confirmation went into logbook 11, the final one in small, precise handwriting. By day 8, he had stopped sleeping more than 4 hours at a stretch, not from anxiety. From the same quality of attention a surgeon gives to the last hour of a long operation. The work requires it and you give it. On day 11, at 6 in the morning by the station clock, he made the final entry in logbook 11. He set the pen down. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he picked up the encrypted communicator and sent a single word to Thorne. Complete. Thorne read the message. He stood up from his desk, walked to the window, looked at the transit lanes for a moment and walked back. He sat down. He opened his top drawer and took out the folded piece of paper. He held it without opening it. 3,400. He put it back in the drawer. He picked up the communicator and typed the only message left to send. Begin interface mode. High Arbiter Vane was eating breakfast when the Apex Sovereign's lights went out. Not dimmed, not flickered, out. The emergency systems should have engaged in under 2 seconds. They did not. The bridge cruise stations went dark in the same instant the overheads died, which was not how any failure cascaded. A power fault hit primary systems first, then secondary. What happened on the Apex Sovereign happened to everything at once, which meant it was not a fault. Vane set down his cup. The bridge was not silent. The crew was already moving, calling across stations, running manual checks, but under the noise something was different. There was a quality to the darkness that Vane's mind reached for and could not name, and then he realized what it was. There were no indicator lights, no status lights on the panels, no standby glow from the consoles. Every system on the bridge, primary and secondary and tertiary, was not in failure mode. It was in something else. The communications officer's voice cut through the noise. High Arbiter, internal alarms are not sounding. Fleet channel is not responding. External signal, sir, external signal is not. A pause. It's not blocked, it's accepting a transmission. Vane stood up. From whom? Nobody answered, because the answer appeared on the forward viewport before anyone could speak. Every display surface on the bridge simultaneously resolved into the same image. Not a hegemony image, not a fleet display or a system map. A face, then another, then another. Hundreds of faces, one after another in slow succession, each one shown for 3 seconds and replaced by the next. Men, women, children, they were still. They were not performing grief or making statements. They were just faces, the way a record of faces looks, methodical, complete, counting. Vane's tactical officer said very quietly, "Sir, the fleet." Vane turned. The forward displays were still cycling through faces, but his tactical officer had pulled up a portable readout, battery-powered, disconnected from the main grid, the kind of backup unit that existed precisely for situations where the main grid was compromised. The readout showed the fleet disposition. All ships present, all ships at their correct positions. All ships with reactor output at neutral. Not emergency stop, neutral. The setting you used when a ship was in dry dock and you wanted the reactor warm but producing nothing. His entire fleet in open space had its engines on and its power in neutral, not because of a fault, because something had put them there. Vane looked at the readout for a long moment. He was doing arithmetic and the arithmetic was not working. A virus could not touch every ship simultaneously. The fleet systems were compartmentalized precisely to prevent cascade infection. An EMP could not do this without physical positioning. A standard jamming array could block communications but could not modulate reactor output. There was no weapon system in the known galaxy that could reach inside the Deathworld management protocol and set 800 warships to neutral at the same moment, because the Deathworld protocol was the most secure distributed management system the hegemony had ever built. His fingers lifted toward the arm of his chair. The tap did not come. The faces on the viewport kept cycling. An older man, two children, a boy and a girl small enough that they were probably siblings, a woman with short hair and the particular look of someone who worked in technical maintenance, a young man who might have been a student. Vane recognized the style of the registry. It was a colonial population record. He had seen hundreds of them filed in expansion surveys. He knew which colony this was from before his data officer said it. High Arbiter, his data officer's voice was careful, the way a person's voice is careful when they are reporting something they do not want to report. The population registry, it matches Vesta 4, all 3,400 names. The faces kept cycling. Then the viewport changed. The faces did not disappear, they pulled back, became small, became a grid in the background, 3,400 small images arranged in rows. In the foreground, filling the center of every display surface on the bridge, a man appeared. He was sitting at a plain table. Behind him, on a shelf, 11 cloth-covered logbooks were arranged in a row. He wore no uniform, he had no insignia. He looked in every visual respect like an administrator, like the kind of man who managed supply chains and filed quarterly reports and was present in rooms where decisions were made without being the one who made them. He looked directly into whatever was recording him, and he spoke. High Arbiter Vane, not loud, not hard, the way someone speaks when they do not need to raise their voice because the person they are addressing has nowhere to go. My name is Elias Thorne, I am the Director of Human Infrastructure Intelligence. You don't have a file on that office because we don't have a file on that office. On the backup readout, Vane's tactical officer was running numbers. Fleet reactor status, neutral all units, fleet communications, accepting the Thorne transmission, nothing else. Navigation, responsive but drawing no power, they were not disabled, they were held. Thorne continued, 18 years ago your office incinerated a human colony and sent a message calling it a demonstration of our place in the current order. He paused, not for effect, for accuracy, the way someone pauses when they want to be precise. We received that message. We agreed that a demonstration was appropriate. We have been preparing ours ever since. Vane's communications officer turned. Sir, I'm trying to reach Command Central. The signal is going out, it's being received. She stopped. They're not answering. Thorne's voice from the viewport. They're watching the same thing you are. Every command node in the Hegemony primary relay network received this transmission simultaneously. Your central hive world included. Vane said quietly, that's not possible. Thorne seemed to hear it or anticipated it because his next words addressed it directly. The Deathworld Management Protocol services 1,400 active fleet nodes and every orbital station in your core worlds. For the past 15 years your maintenance contractors have been us. We understood your code well enough, we just needed access to the maintenance layer. He reached to one side off frame for a moment and set something on the table in front of him. A logbook. Cloth cover worn at the corners, the kind that held handwritten maintenance records. Your archival team filed these as primitive record-keeping, non-material artifacts. The overhead syntax was in them the whole time. The tactical officer's voice had gone very flat. Sir, I've confirmed the neutral reactor status across 9 fleet groups. It's not a readout error. Thorne did not look at notes. You assumed we were too primitive to understand your technology. You were right about the technology. We did not understand it. We understood something else. He looked directly into the recording with an expression that was not anger and was not satisfaction. We understood that the people who serviced your infrastructure were invisible to you. That invisible people can go anywhere. Vane stood at the center of his dark bridge, the faces of Vesta 4 arranged behind the man on the screen in 3,400 small squares, and he ran the arithmetic one more time. 15 years of contractor access, the Deathworld maintenance layer, code inserted below the diagnostic threshold, a synchronized trigger reaching every node at once. He had approved the expanded contractor engagement himself. He had approved it because human labor was cheap, and the humans were too primitive to do anything with the access. His fingers did not tap. Here is what we are offering. Thorne's voice did not change register. Your fleet will remain at neutral reactor output for 24 hours. In that time your high command will receive a document. The document contains 3 items. He did not list them with ceremony. He listed them the way someone reads a maintenance checklist, item by item without inflection. The first, full withdrawal from both human colonial corridors, permanent, verified by independent observation. The second, a public acknowledgement filed with the Advisory Council that the destruction of both colonies was outside the bounds of the Galactic Compact's primacy clause. The third, the establishment of a non-interference boundary at the current edge of human-settled space, guaranteed by the same legal mechanism your office used to authorize the primacy clause itself. A pause. We are not asking for reparations. We are not asking for the Advisory Council to be restructured. We are not asking for the 14,000 years of the hegemony's record to be reviewed. He looked at the camera. We are asking for a line on a map and for you to stay on your side of it, that is all. He reached forward and touched something off-screen. The 24 hours has already begun. The viewport went dark. The backup readout showed, fleet at neutral, all units, all fleet groups unchanged. Outside the Apex Sovereign's viewports, in every direction, stars. Vane's tactical officer said, "Sir, do we have any systems that are not on the Deathworld network?" A very long silence. "Yes," Vane said, 17 emergency beacon units, battery-powered, independent frequency. "Shall I?" "Signal Command Central," Vane said. "Tell them to read the document." He did not sit back down. He stood at the center of the bridge, very still, while the faces of Vesta 4 faded from the dark viewport glass and were replaced by the ordinary stars. His fingers at his side were completely still. The document reached Command Central in 4 minutes. This was known later, from the internal logs that survived the 24 hours, the ones that were not on the Deathworld network, the battery-powered systems, the independent recorders that the hegemony had built for exactly the kind of catastrophic network failure they had always assumed would be external in origin. The document traveled through the emergency beacon frequency, the 17 independent units on the Apex Sovereign relaying it outward to the nearest non-network communication array, and from there to Command Central on the Hive world in 9 minutes total. The chief administrator of Command Central read it in 13 minutes. She read it twice. Then she called a closed session of the 9 senior administrators who were present in the building, which was all of them, because they had all received the transmission on their screens simultaneously, and none of them had left. The session lasted 2 hours and 11 minutes. No record of what was said in that session was preserved. This was not because it was deliberately destroyed. It was because the session happened in the one conference room in the building with no recording equipment, a room that had been built for exactly that purpose, the kind of room where the hegemony's senior leadership went when they needed to say things that could not be said anywhere else. What happened in that room stayed in that room by design. What came out of the room was a document, shorter than the counter-notation that had buried the original Vesta 4 grievance, much shorter. It contained 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph formally acknowledged the validity of each of the 3 terms. The second paragraph committed the hegemony to compliance, beginning immediately, with independent observation as specified. The third paragraph requested that the Deathworld management systems be restored to nominal operation upon confirmation of compliance. The document was signed by the chief administrator and transmitted through the emergency beacon frequency to the Apex Sovereign. Vane read it on his backup readout, standing at the same position on the bridge where he had stood for the past 6 hours. He had not sat down, he had eaten nothing. His staff had moved around him carefully, the way people move around a structure they are not sure is stable. He read the document, he set the readout down. "Signal Director Thorne," he said. "Emergency frequency, confirm receipt." His communications officer said, "Sir, we don't have a frequency for Director Thorne." A pause. "He will be listening," Vane said. "Send it open." The confirmation arrived on Thorne's encrypted communicator at hour 19. He was in the windowless room. Vance was there too, sitting across the table from him, and 2 members of the core team who had been with the project since year 1. No one had slept. The logbooks were on the table, all 11 of them, brought out of storage for the first time, stacked without ceremony in the center of the table where anyone could reach them. Thorne read the confirmation. He passed the communicator to Vance without comment. Vance read it and passed it to the person beside him. It went around the table. No one said anything for a moment. Then the person at the end of the table, a systems engineer who had been with the project since year 3, who had never been named in any record, and who had spent 15 years writing code in rooms without windows, said, very quietly, "That's it then." It was not a question. Thorne looked at the stack of logbooks in the center of the table. He looked at each person in the room. He did not make a speech. He had never made speeches in 17 years. He simply nodded once, the way he nodded when something was filed correctly and could be moved to the closed column. He picked up his communicator and sent the response to the open frequency. Confirmed, compliance will be observed. The systems will restore to nominal operation at hour 24 as stated. He set the communicator down. Go home, he said, sleep. He sat alone in the room until hour 24. Then he entered the command that Vance had built into the ledger for exactly this moment, the off switch, the one that had always been there, the one that made the thing reversible, and sent it. Across the hegemony's relay network, in the maintenance layer that no diagnostic had ever reached, 1,400 small patient pieces of code received the command and stopped. The Deathworld management protocol resumed nominal operation. The Apex Sovereign's lights came back on. The independent observers arrived at the first human colonial corridor 11 days later. They were from the 3 mid-tier civilizations that had trade relationships with humanity, requested by the terms document, confirmed by the Advisory Council in a vote that passed with 7 of 9 members, the hegemony's 4 representatives voting in favor because the alternative was not specified in the document, and they had decided, in the session with no recording equipment, that they did not want to learn what the alternative was. The hegemony fleet withdrew from both corridors over the following 30 days. The withdrawal was documented, verified, and filed with the Advisory Council as required. The public acknowledgement, the second term, the hardest one, the one that required the hegemony to state in writing that the destruction of Vesta 4 and Dara Station had exceeded the bounds of the primacy clause, was filed on day 31. The filing ran 4 sentences. 4 sentences, where the counter-notation had run 300 pages. Thorne received a copy in his office. He read it once, set it on his desk, and looked at it for a while. It did not say sorry, it did not say we were wrong to do it. It said, in the careful legal phrasing of the Galactic Compact, the application of technological primacy, subsection 7, in the incidents designated Vesta 4 and Dara Station, did not meet the procedural requirements for civilian relocation under Article 12, C, and the hegemony withdraws those applications from the record. 1,100 people, 3,400 people, withdrawn from the record. Thorne opened his top drawer and took out the folded piece of paper. He unfolded it for the last time. The handwriting was still clear, Darsa's small, precise script, the kind of handwriting a person develops when they are used to making records that need to last. The number was still there. He looked at it for a long moment. He folded it once, along the crease that had been there for 17 years. He put it in the top drawer. He closed the drawer. He did not throw it away. Some things were not for throwing away. They were for keeping in a drawer in a room where anyone who needed to understand the arithmetic could find them. The recategorization of humanity in the Galactic Compact's administrative registry took place 6 weeks after the withdrawal was complete. It was not initiated by the hegemony. It was initiated by the 3 mid-tier civilizations whose observers had watched the withdrawal, who had also, 6 weeks earlier, watched the transmission on their own screens, Thorne's face in the center, the Vesta 4 registry arranged behind him, the fleet at neutral, and who had spent the intervening weeks in quiet conversation with each other about what they had seen. The recategorization was a technical filing. It changed humanity's designation in the registry from Category 5, pre-FTL, limited infrastructure, non-strategic, to Category 2, advanced infrastructure, strategic capability, non-aggressive posture, pending review. Category 2 was where the hegemony sat. The filing was 90 words long. Vane received a summary of it on his slate during a routine morning briefing. He was back in the command chair, the bridge restored to full operation, the fleet back at standard reactor output. His staff had adapted, the way staff adapt, carefully, professionally, without discussing it. The morning briefing proceeded as morning briefings proceeded. He read the summary. He set the slate on the arm of his chair. His fingers did not tap. He looked at the summary for a moment longer, then he moved to the next item on the agenda. Darsa heard about the filing from a news aggregate 4 weeks after it went through. She was working in a records office on a station that was not Vesta 4 and never would be, cataloguing immigration manifests for the new settlements in the corridor that the non-interference boundary now protected. It was ordinary work. She was good at it. She read the recategorization notice once. She thought about the number she had written down years ago on a piece of paper that she had left on a desk for a man she trusted. She went back to the manifests. There were new names in them now, people moving into the corridor, families mostly. The first settlements were small, a few hundred people each, the kind of numbers that a colony starts with before it becomes something larger. The manifest listed them the way manifest always listed people: name, age, origin, destination, each one a line in a record. She processed them carefully, she did not rush. She had learned, in the years since Vesta 4, that careful was the correct speed for things that needed to last. The Advisory Council's formal record of the session that ratified the non-interference boundary contained one notation that was not procedural. It was added by the Council's senior archivist, a Threnody named Vex who had held the position for 40 years and who had the authority, under the Council's own charter, to append observations to the formal record when those observations were relevant to historical context. The notation read in full: appended for record, the species designated humanity, Category 5 at the commencement of this matter, achieved the outcome described in this filing through a period of 18 years of covert infrastructure work, at no point initiating armed conflict, at no point threatening any party beyond the presenting of a demonstrated capability, and having demonstrated that capability, at no point using it beyond the parameters of the original terms. The Advisory Council notes that no previous Category 5 species has achieved recategorization through this mechanism. The Council further notes that the mechanism used, service contractor access to distributed management infrastructure, has no current defense protocol in the hegemony's administrative framework, or in any other signatory's framework. Observation submitted for the record as potentially relevant to future proceedings. It was the kind of notation that archivists added to records when they wanted something preserved, without making it a recommendation. Vex had added 17 such notations in 40 years. This was her 18th. She did not expect it to be read immediately. She expected it to be read later, by whoever needed to understand how things had changed, and when and why no one had seen it coming. Somewhere in the hegemony's archival server, in a folder labeled Non-Material Artifacts, Expansion Survey, Vesta 4 Sector, 11 entries sat in a directory that no one had opened in 17 years. Each entry contained a scan of a cloth-covered logbook, filed as primitive record-keeping, non-strategic, low priority, no review required. The directory's last accessed timestamp read, 17 years, 4 months and 11 days ago. It would stay that way. The logbooks themselves were in a room without windows, stacked in the center of a plain table where they had been left after the confirmation came through. They were not archived, they were not ceremonially preserved. They were just there, the way tools are there when the work is done, not celebrated, not discarded. Maintenance logs, written by hand, in the notation of a species that had once ranked 209th on the Resource Contribution Index. The galaxy had celebrated the withdrawal. There had been statements, filings, careful diplomatic language about the restoration of order and the affirmation of the Compact's protective frameworks. The galaxy had celebrated, and then the archivists and the analysts and the senior administrators in the rooms with no recording equipment had sat with the question that the celebration hadn't answered, not what humanity had done but what humanity had not done. The ledger had reached every command node. The fleet had been at neutral for 24 hours. The terms had been 3 items, small, specific, bounded. And then the off switch had been used. That was the part that stayed with them, not the capability, the restraint, the fact that the thing had been built and tested and triggered and then turned off exactly as promised because that was all that had been asked for. They had started a war with humans. Humans had chosen not to fight it. The galaxy was still working out what that meant.